Our next Reddit post is from a user. This happened about 5 years ago, when my partner and I moved into our first house together. We are huge dorks, and we love reading. So instead of watching TV, we would read books to each other before bed. We would snuggle on the couch with a glass of wine and take turns reading aloud. It was our special thing. We got a few books for Christmas that year, so we were eager to start our new tradition of reading them together. One was a mythology book, one was a collection of fairy tales, and the third was an illustrated retelling of Shakespeare's Hamlet. That last one was for me. I had wanted it for ages, so I was very excited. My partner knew this. And since they were already reading the other 2 books aloud to me, I asked if they could read Hamlet to me. They agreed, but only if I let them pick the next book we read together. I agreed. It took me a couple of nights to get through the prologue and the first few scenes. But then I was really sucked into the play. The plot is actually really interesting, and the illustrations were amazing. I was getting through the book really quickly, and my partner was left with nothing to read. So I asked them to go get their own book to read, so we could read together. At first they weren't keen on that idea, but I insisted, so they went off to bed grumbling. The next night I started reading, but I didn't get very far. My partner kept interrupting me. Hey, remember what happened here? Oh, and this reminds me of such and such. Oh, this character is just like your Uncle Steve. And then they started to ask questions. Why did Gertrude marry her brother-in-law? What's a foil? What does that mean? Hey, isn't this supposed to be funny? What? You don't think so? Don't be ridiculous. I have no idea what I'm saying. This is harder than it looks. Why am I even doing this again? See, this is why I hate Hamlet. I'm pretty sure they were making it up as they went along too. So needless to say, we didn't make much progress that night. I finally told them to just read their own book and leave me alone. They pouted for a bit, but eventually agreed. For the rest of that week, we read our own books in silence, but I still heard little snickers and giggles coming from my partner's side of the bed at night. I also occasionally caught them mouthing words as if they were reading aloud. Little weirdo. Now, normally we are the type of people who would save a bookmark and pass the book back and forth, reading one chapter or story at a time. But after that experience, we needed a break from Hamlet. But we still wanted to spend our evenings reading together. So I suggested that we get our own copies of the other 2 books, and then we would read them at the same time. This way, we could talk about what we were reading without having to worry about spoilers for the other person. So we bought our own copies of those 2 books. For the next few months, we read happily to each other, sharing quotes and discussing the stories over wine. Then spring came, and we started spending more and more time outside. Reading together on the couch became a rare treat, so we decided to simplify things. We agreed that I would read the book I was more interested in at the time, and they could either read along with me or read their own book. If they wanted to, they were welcome to interrupt me with comments and questions, but I would not be forced to read anything aloud. That arrangement worked well for us. Then summer came, and we spent most of our evenings out with friends. We hardly ever read at home anymore. Then fall came, and we were back to reading together on the couch most nights. But by then I was so bored of Hamlet that I shoved it under the coffee table, and we never looked at it again. We did, however, finish those other 2 books, and we're still reading to each other every night. Sometimes the stories are sad, and I cry. Sometimes they're funny, and we laugh until our stomachs hurt. We read poetry to each other and share silly facts and quotes. It's still our thing. Oh, and that bedtime story at the beginning, yeah, that happens too. Our Chow Chow is almost 13 now. She's been with us for almost 9 years, and she's always been a part of our bedtime routine. She would curl up at the foot of our bed and listen as we read. She's never been a big fan of being pet while we're reading because she likes to chew on her toys at bedtime. but she will let us stroke her if we stop reading for a minute. She rarely barks or makes any noise during our story time, and she mostly just falls asleep. But every once in a while, she will lift her head up and give a little woof, as if to say, "Hey, read to me," which we always happily oblige. She has a big, deep bark. But when she wants our attention, she makes this weird clicking sound that kind of sounds like a bird eating a cracker. The cat, on the other hand, doesn't like to be left out. When we turn off the lights and get into bed, they jump up on the headboard and sit between us as we read. They used to watch us read from the foot of the bed, but they quickly figured out that jumping on the bed gives them a better view. I guess they aren't as needy as the dog, but they do like to headbutt us if we stop reading too soon, or if we try to read in separate beds. They also like to meow loudly when there's a knock at the door, so sometimes we get interrupted during our reading time. Usually they'll just settle down after a few minutes, but sometimes they need a good petting to calm them down. Yeah, our pets are a lot like our kids. They need us to entertain them at all times, but honestly, we wouldn't trade it for the world. Down in the comments, someone shared this story about their own Chow Chow. I love this. Our Chow Chow is the same. He sleeps at the foot of our bed, waiting for us to settle in before he goes up and starts demanding pats and cuddles. And then he curls up next to me and lets out these little grunting noises. He snores so loud that it sounds like he's trying to breathe through a straw. And my husband reads to him. At first, he listens intently, but then he starts falling asleep. And then he starts drooling, and his tongue hangs out the side of his mouth. My husband says to him, "You can't fall asleep yet. You haven't heard the best part." He says this every single time, and then he keeps reading, and the dog wakes up briefly and wags his tail, and then falls back asleep. Rinse and repeat. Our dog is a little weirdo. This person added, and he never jumps up on the bed or the couch. He's scared of heights, I guess. Even though he can jump up on the bed, he just refuses to. He likes to stay on the ground where he feels safe. But then he wants to be close to you. He's such a weirdo. This made me realize how spoiled my Chow Chow is. She has never slept in a bed besides ours. She comes into our room and jumps up on the bed right away. Even when we've been on vacation, she would see us get into bed and she would immediately hop up. Even if we were sleeping in a hotel or something, she would immediately jump up on the bed. Our next Reddit post is from another user. A few years ago, my wife and I were gifted a copy of Peter Pan by our favorite author. It's just a normal copy, but signed by the author. We had recently moved and were unpacking the bookshelf that had most of our collection in it. As we unpacked the books, my wife got lost in the fairy tales that she hadn't read in a while. I continued working on the puzzle of assembling the bookshelf, putting the last few books on the top shelf. My wife called me over to look at a passage in the book. I walked over and sat on the floor as she read the passage to me. As she read, she would stop occasionally and point out the beautiful illustrations. The artist did an amazing job, as always, and that particular edition had some unique art pieces in it. We spent a few minutes going through the rest of the book and enjoying ourselves. Then we packed up the rest of the books and went downstairs to put them in the living room. My wife put on an audiobook while I helped the kids with homework. About an hour later, my son asked me to read him a story. Now, normally my wife takes this duty on because she's better at reading aloud than I am, but she was in the middle of a work call, so I went upstairs to grab a book for him. I grabbed the Peter Pan book, thinking my wife had already read that story to him. I brought it downstairs and sat down. I opened the book and read the first page to him. He smiled and asked me to keep going. Well, I didn't want to interrupt my wife's call, so I didn't want to read too loud. Plus, I was terrible at reading stories aloud anyway, so I started reading quietly. The problem was that the quiet rustle of the pages, combined with the low volume of the audiobook in the other room, created this horrible white noise effect where I couldn't understand the words I was reading. I tried to raise my voice a bit, but that made me feel like I was yelling at my kid. We went back and forth like this for a few minutes until my son asked me to turn on the light. Of course, that made me feel like a moron. Like, why didn't I think of that in the first place? So I turned on the light and started reading aloud. Once I could see the words, I was able to read them properly. Eventually, my wife got off the phone and joined us. She picked up the book and started reading it to him herself. Our next Reddit post is from another user. I grew up on this book, The Complete Stories of Winnie the Pooh. It was my favorite book as a child. I read it so much that I practically wore it out. When I had children of my own, I bought my own copy so I could read it to them. By the time my youngest started preschool, the book was well loved, but still hanging on. The story still smelled faintly of vanilla because I had always read it with hot chocolate. One day I went to pull it off the bookshelf and the pages fell apart in my hands. The spine had finally snapped. I was heartbroken. I took the pieces downstairs and laid them out on the counter as I rummed family to replace it. They all chimed in with suggestions, but none of them were quite right. I reread the old, well-loved stories to them, but none of them were quite as magical. That weekend, I went to an antique store looking for a replacement copy. All the ones they had were either damaged or modern editions that smelled faintly of chlorine and bleach. No hot chocolate. I sighed and gave up. A few weeks later, my mum invited us over for dinner. Before we left, my daughter saw the book on the bookshelf and asked me if we could take it home. She promised to take good care of it, and I agreed. She was thrilled. After dinner, we were clearing dishes from the table when my daughter said, "Mom, Dad, can I please keep this book?" My mom looked puzzled. "What book?" "The book of stories." My mom laughed. "Oh, you mean Nana's old Winnie the Pooh book." My daughter and I looked at each other in surprise. "You have a spare copy?" "Of course. I read it all the time when you and your brother were little." She went to the cupboard and pulled out a copy of Winnie the Pooh, one that smelled faintly of vanilla and hot chocolate. I felt tears pricking my eyes. I told her how much I had loved that book and that she could borrow it if she liked. She beamed and gave me a hug. Then she ran off to show her brother the pictures. After she left the room, I hugged my mom and thanked her. She squeezed me tightly and said, "Don't mention it. Just don't tell your sister I gave it to you first." I laughed and ruffled my daughter's hair as she showed me her favorite picture. Life was good. And that's all for this episode. See you next time.